The Eastern TimeROIT, when Mary Kamidoi and her sister were recruited from Flint Business College to work in the accounting department at Ford Motor Company in 1951, they were among the first Japanese American women to work there. They tried to buy a house in neighboring Dearborn, Michigan, the same city in which they worked, only to be blocked by racial covenants and restrictions. Instead, they rented a series of apartments and, eventually, a house on West Grand Boulevard in Detroit. They often sat in their large picture window and noticed all the young black people going in and out of the house next door, but never stopped to wonder what was going on. It wasn't until much later that they learned that they were living next door to Hitsville, USA, the birthplace of Motown. Without realizing it, the Kamidoi sisters probably saw all the big Motown stars, like Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder, in the early days of their fame. Visitors at Exile to Motown exhibit opening at Detroit Historical Museum, Detroit, July 31, 2021. Photograph courtesy of Japanese American Citizens League Detroit Chapter.
The first people of Japanese descent came to Michigan in the late 1800s, drawn to educational and work opportunities. However, it was after Japanese Americans were released from concentration camps at the end of World War I that the community really grew. Many decided not to return back to what had once been their homes on the West Coast. Rather, some decided to seek work and start new lives in other parts of the country, wherever they had connections or when people were willing to hire them. These new Japanese American communities were much smaller than those on the West Coast had been, but the challenges they faced due to racism and discrimination did not end instantly in 1945. The Detroit chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League has been collecting and sharing the stories of the Japanese American community in the area. These stories, spanning over 100 years, are a vital part of Detroit's history, and similar stories can be found in communities across the country. Folding origami cranes at an Exile to Motown event at Ann Arbor District Library, Ann Arbor, Michigan. Cranes or tsaru were then sent to Tsaru for solidarity to be part of a protest against family separation and incarceration of children at the southern border. May 11, 2019. Photographed by Francis Kaihua Wang, the curators of the recent Exile to Motown exhibit at the Detroit Historical Museum emphasize that these community stories should not be looked at as a microcosm or as a splash of local ethnic color, optional and separate from the rest of the city. Instead, they should be examined as an integral part of the larger story of Detroit, and ultimately America. The Japanese American story in Detroit actually can't be told without thinking about its embeddedness in the city itself, thinking about the forced removal of Japanese Americans in relation to the forced removal of indigenous peoples to build Detroit in the first place, about the ways black bodies have been policed in terms of where they are allowed to exist and thrive in the city. Mika Kennedy, Japanese American Citizens League Detroit Chapter President, and co-curator of the Exile to Motown exhibit, told the PBS NewsHour. When we take that step back, we see these same narratives, sung in a different key, but part of the same history. Exile to Motown began as a grassroots oral history project to collect the stories of largely second-generation Japanese American elders who had settled in the Metro Detroit area after the end of World War I. They had important stories that for the most part had not been fully documented or published, and there was a window of opportunity to do this that was closing, said Scott Kuroshiga, author of The Shifting Grounds of Race, Black and Japanese Americans in the Making of Multi-Ethnic Los Angeles, and co-author of Grace Lee Boggs's The Next American Revolution. Their histories were especially relevant as Arab, Muslim, and South Asian Americans, many concentrated in Metro Detroit, were targeted for racial profiling, detention, and deportation after 9/11. With some training in how to conduct oral history interviews and how to archive photos, community members conducted interviews between 2003 and 2015, with some assistance from University of Michigan students and faculty. The authorship was truly collective and arose from the grassroots, Kuroshiga said. The Exile to Motown book was published in 2015. Many of the elders we interviewed or planned to interview sadly joined the ancestors before the book was published, he added. After the book, the group created a small traveling exhibit which was displayed in several Metro Detroit libraries and classrooms, the Consulate General of Japan in Detroit, and the JACL National Convention in Salt Lake City. Curators gave presentations and organized community storytelling workshops. With each iteration, the project continues to develop. Detroit Public Television's One Detroit spoke with the curators behind the Exile to Motown exhibit at the Detroit Historical Museum. Video by One Detroit. The exhibit at the Detroit Historical Museum was the largest iteration yet, retelling crucial parts of Detroit's history from a Japanese-American perspective. It investigates how Japanese Americans came to settle in the area, the many different types of work Japanese Americans did, including farming, retail, secretarial, automotive, translation, art, and architecture, and the many ways Japanese Americans celebrated their cultures, both deeply Japanese and deeply American, at a time when difference was not really celebrated but also could not be denied. Masao James Hirata as depicted in Diego Rivera's 1932 Detroit Industry murals at the Detroit Institute of Art. Hirata came to Detroit before World War I and played a critical role in B-29 bomber production at the Fort Willow Run plant, but was kept under careful surveillance by the FBI during World War I. March 1, 2019. Photograph by Brian Tawara. Masao James Hirata is the lone Japanese-American man depicted in Diego Rivera's 1932 Detroit Industry murals at the Detroit Institute of Art. 27 of Rivera's murals are displayed across 4 walls in a prominent display at the museum. They portray, in grand scale, the geological, technological, and human history of Detroit. All the people in the murals are based on real people. Hirata can be located on the north wall, working on the assembly line with a diverse cast of workers, standing between brown, black, and white men.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe